Hello, and thank you for joining the second of Appalachian Voices four-part webinar series for 2016. My name is Lee Payne, and I serve as the AmeriCorps Communications Associate in the Boone, North Carolina office of Appalachian Voices, which is a regional environmental nonprofit. As part of my service with AmeriCorps, I'll be collecting feedback on today's discussion through a short 5-question survey. The survey will be distributed at the end of the webinar, but if you need to leave early today, I'll also be sending out an email link. I really appreciate your feedback. Also, as a condition of my AmeriCorps service, I cannot participate in political activities, so I appreciate everyone's understanding of my need to avoid politics today. Now let's get started with our discussion. As of 2018, the United States was crisscrossed by more than 305,000 miles of natural gas pipelines, and since then, this figure has risen steadily. In central and southern Appalachia, a web of pipelines invades the landscape, linking drilling wells in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio to states and regional pipelines, storage facilities, power plants, and coastal ports for exports. Today, we will be looking primarily at 2 pipeline projects proposed for the Appalachian region, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which would jointly extend more than 800 miles and would link natural gas from the Marcellus and Utica shale formations to destinations in West Virginia, and North Carolina. While today's discussion will focus on the impacts of these proposed infrastructure projects, it is also important to remember that communities near the extraction sites are also impacted by the effects of fracking and our increasing reliance on natural gas. I'm so glad that all of you could be here to join this discussion. Joining us this afternoon are Louis Freeman, the Chairman and Executive Director of the Allegheny-Blue Ridge Alliance, a coalition of organizations concerned about the proposed pipeline expansions in Virginia and West Virginia. Anita Puck, the Director of the Appalachian Studies Program at Virginia Tech, who has been active in environmental issues of the region for more than 30 years. Cathy Kunkel, an energy analyst for the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis and co-author of a new study on the finances of the proposed pipeline projects, and Hannah Wiegard, the Virginia campaign coordinator for Appalachian Voices. The main questions we'll be focusing on today concern how the proposed pipelines would affect communities along the routes, the financial implications of the pipelines, and ways that concerned citizens can become more involved. We'll have time for a couple of questions after each panelist has finished speaking. On the right side of your screen in the GoToWebinar control panel, there's a drop-down box labeled Questions. To submit your questions, just type them here and we'll get to as many of these as we can. We're going to begin our discussion now with Louis Freeman. He will start us off with the discussion of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the impact this project would have on the communities along its route. Louis is the Chair and Executive Director of the Allegheny-Blue Ridge Alliance. Thanks so much for joining us, Lou. What can you tell us about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline?
Yeah, thank you, Lee, and good afternoon to all who are participating. Let me spend a very brief word on what ABRA is, the Allegheny-Blue Ridge Alliance. We're a coalition. As of today, we have 50 members run by a steering committee of 13 members. We organized in September of 2014 in reaction to the proposed Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and that has been our principal focus, but we have expanded many of our activities. We now have a weekly email update that many people on the phone probably received. A week ago Saturday, we had the third large meeting, what we call the Pipeline Summit, and for that particular event, we included many representatives of the Power Coalition, which will be represented a little later in the call, who are fighting the Mountain Valley Pipeline. We've also reached out on a grassroots basis in reaction to the proposal to route the pipeline into a different part of Pocahontas County, West Virginia, and into Bath County and up the Deerfield Valley part of Augusta County. And as a result of meetings we put on, there are now coalition groups in Pocahontas County and in Bath County. And for those of you who don't know us, you can check us out on our website at ABRA or abralliance.org. Our policy on the Atlantic Coast Pipeline started out in June of last year by expressing opposition to any of the then proposed routes, and that continues to be the case. And the main reasons are because of the ecological harm to plant and animal, plus water supplies in particular, without any net benefit to landowners or communities. And we, in our policy, which still stands, recommend a better approach by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to pursue a regional EIS or programmatic EIS. Secondly, we call for an investigation into just how much more natural gas is needed and whether existing infrastructure might be more suitable, and that's something I think Cathy will be addressing because they address it in their study. And then also we called on an examination of the life of the Marcellus shale fields in particular. Right now, as I think most of you know, the environmental impact statement that is essential for a final decision, yay or nay, on a proposed pipeline is being studied, but on hold for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, in part because of the rerouting through central Pocahontas into Bath County and up the Deerfield Valley. And for those of you who don't know, FERC announced this morning that there will be scoping meetings and a scoping period that ends June 2nd. The meetings on the 20th of May in Marlinton, West Virginia, and in the I think it's in Hot Springs on the Saturday the 21st. And we'll have more information on that in our, we just sent out a mailing today. We'll have more information on our update. Let me turn now to the question at hand of what is the impact of this proposed pipeline on communities. Early in the life of this proposal, there were claims by Dominion and their partners, but principally by Dominion, that this would create jobs and it would be an economic boon to all the communities affected. We responded by commissioning through one of our members a study that was done and released last year by Synops, an economic consulting firm in Boston, that said that any job benefits were exaggerated, if not fabricated. Those are my words, not theirs, but that's essentially what they were saying. We followed that up with a economic study that 4 of our members, Highlanders for Responsible Development, of which I also serve as president, the Augusta County Alliance, Friends of Nelson County, or Friends of Nelson as they call themselves, the Friends of Buckingham and Yogaville, all members of ABRA, put together a study done by Keylog Economics of Charlottesville to look at the economic impacts on at least those 4 counties. And the bottom line, that's a study's available on our website, but the bottom line of that study is that it would be decidedly costly for all 4 counties collectively, and these are conservative figures. The analysis that Keylog did found that up to $141 million in lost property values and services, for instance, would be one of the impacts. And then let me quote from the study by Spencer Phillips, the economist that led the study. He said that putting the stream of cost into present value terms and adding the one-time cost, the total estimated cost of the ACP in Highland, Augusta, Nelson, and Buckingham counties is between $6.9 and $7.9 billion. So the claims that Dominion and their partners have made as to the benefits are exaggerated and we believe in many cases fabricated. There's certainly, and the Keylog study looks at this, the impact on the ecological systems that characterize the Allegheny-Blue Ridge region, and not just our 4 counties, are crucial, and they help define this area that many of us live in and work in. And I think all of us have been dismayed at the lack of straight answers from Dominion and their partners in responding to concerns that we have about water, about the safety of building a pipeline over the karst terrain as well as the steep mountain terrains and other ecological impacts. So those are all not only reasons to oppose the pipeline, but they have an economic cost to all of the communities and to the landowners. Let me finish up by pointing, and I think this is a good metaphor for the battle that we face, and probably is not too dissimilar from the battle that those that are opposing the Mountain Valley Pipeline face. Sometime last year, there was a formation of an Energy Sure coalition that some of you may have read about, inspired by Dominion. And one of the spokespersons for that coalition was a businessman from Charlottesville, and he wrote to the local paper here in Highland County, urging that notwithstanding the negative things that would happen to the terrain, etc., that we should be urged to, quote, and this is a quote, take one for the team. In other words, he's saying that it's more important that we be assured of the energy where I live rather than you enjoying your benefits. I responded, and I'm going to quote myself here because I think this really captures what this battle is about. I said, the debate over whether and where the Atlantic Coast Pipeline should be built is ultimately about values. Assured energy supplies for businesses and home is an important value, but there are costs associated with obtaining needed energy, costs that will adversely affect other values, the ecology and the lives of the communities and citizens. Those are values just as important as the need for energy, perhaps more so. So I think that sums up the fight that's going on, and we continue. We've been encouraged by some of the delays, but as you noted with the scheduling of the scoping meetings, the process continues to go on, and those of us who are concerned cannot lay back and take solace in any of what are so far just temporary victories. Be happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Liz. We do have a question coming in from the audience. Let me just open it up. The question is about the compressor stations going through Buckingham County. I wonder if you could say a few words about the impact of this aspect of the infrastructure, as well as what community or what citizens can do to raise awareness for the full impact of the pipelines, rather of the pipeline constructions instead of just the pipelines themselves.
Yeah, in order for these pipelines to work, there need to be compressor stations that keep the gas moving, and the citizens of Buckingham County from early on have been concerned about the fact that, first of all, there was the one compressor station in Virginia that was proposed would be in their county, and they began doing a lot of serious research and have come to the very disturbing conclusion that there would be not only noise pollution to a county where many have moved because it is so quiet, including the wonderful Yogaville establishment. But secondly, there would be enhanced air pollution, and they have met without satisfaction, I think it's fair to say, with Dominion. They even sent a team in, and that continues to be a concern, and now an even greater concern because in the latest filings the Dominion has made, there has been an upgrade of that compressor station. There's also concern not just about that compressor station, but about the prospect of there being additional compressor stations at a later time. None have specifically been proposed, but we do know that if as the route is already lengthened, and if they choose to move from 1.5 to 2.0 in terms of the flow through, it would perhaps need more compressor stations. So that is a concern. Let me mention one other concern that has been below the radar screen, and that is the extensive impact that this pipeline will have in both its building and later on of all of the access roads that need to be built. And in many of the counties, the access roads are greater in length than the pipeline itself, and the amount of environmental disturbance that would take place is greater than, or as great as the environmental disturbance that would take place by the pipeline.
Wonderful, thank you. We have a couple more questions. I think we may need to move on to Anita's presentation, but we'll try to get back to the other questions that have come in later in the presentation. So our next...
Okay.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Lou.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to be hearing from Anita Puck, who will present information about the proposed Mountain Valley Pipeline. Anita is the director of the Appalachian Studies program at Virginia Tech. She has also been active in environmental issues of West Virginia and Kentucky for more than 30 years. Thank you for joining us, Anita. And will you be able to present your presentation from there, or would you like me to do it from here?
Well, let's try it from here. Okay. And I'm going to click on this little icon, and let's see what happens. You can make the presenter show my screen and share the webcam. Let me get that out of the way, get you out of the way. Can everybody see this now?
Yes.
Can you see this?
Yes.
Come on, do your thing.
Oops.
There we go. All right. So yeah, this is my my little PowerPoint, and Lewis's. I mean, what you basically can do is just take Lewis's comments and change the name and send them over to Mountain Valley Pipeline if you like, because our issues are very, very much the same. And APRA and us have been working together under our kind of interstate grouping called POWER, Preserve Our Water Heritage and Resources Group, which is now encompassing about 8 counties. And so what I'm going to try to do is just tell you a little bit about the Mountain Valley Pipeline and citizen organization to fight it. But the reasons for fighting it, Lewis talked about very well. We're very much in the same kind of ecological zone. We very much have the same kind of environmental issues, although the species may vary a bit. So I guess my first point would be is the points of discussion that I hope I can cover today. Some of them can be reduced because Lewis talked about them, but I want to talk about what the pipeline is, what is a compressor station, the key issues for citizens, which he talked about, the resistance and anti-pipeline citizen group. So basically, I will be just adding to what Lewis said. Here we have a couple of maps. One of the things that Mountain Valley does, well, first of all, let me say Mountain Valley Pipeline is a limited liability corporation, which means that it has constructed itself in a way to minimize any kind of legal impact upon it. It is run by EQT Corporation at the moment, out of Pittsburgh, which is a natural gas production company. And as a natural gas production company, it has been fracking like nobody's business up in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and in northern West Virginia, and now has an oversupply, incredible oversupply, such that it is firing people or laying them off rather, and cutting back its production dramatically, such that some communities in southwestern Pennsylvania have now been economically, the word destroyed is too strong, but certainly have been reduced and under really strapped right now because they were a boom communities based on having fracking employees staying in their hotels, buying groceries and clothing and so on, and now that's not happening. So EQT, even as strong as it is suffering from the economic downturn of the natural gas industry more generally. So EQT is trying to get its gas transported to one of the coasts primarily and to part of the South, to Florida in particular. It has partners. Its first partner was NextEra out of Florida, a public utility company that has somewhere around 45% interest in Mountain Valley LLC. And then in addition, there is a company, I'm afraid I didn't have time to check on all of the acronyms before I came, but there's a company up in the Baltimore area that specializes in international transport of liquid gas, and I think it's WGM or WMG or something, 3 letters that start with a W. They've added another company in the South whose acronym I cannot remember, and they have a 1 or a 2% involvement from Roanoke Gas over here in Roanoke County. The Roanoke gas situation is rather tenuous as we understand it. It was added strictly to prove to FERC, to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that the gas is not entirely going overseas or out of the region, that there is some kind of local, along the pipeline, interest in using this gas. Because one of the issues with a pipeline of this size is how do you tap it? How do you make it accessible at the local level? It's very, very expensive. And as Lewis pointed out, the compression of the gas is very high. And so you have to have, you can't just put in a line. You have to have all of this equipment with it to reduce its compression and make it transportable at the local level. And that we're not quite sure of the figures, but it's anywhere from $1 to $40 million. $1 million just to create the tap, and then you have to do all of the other stuff with it. And so anywhere from up to 40, we're hearing 17 million. But many of the communities that we're talking about along the line simply cannot afford that, even if they wanted it. So the arguments made by Governor McAuliffe here in Virginia that it's going to bring factories to Virginia for this particular pipeline are rather moot. They just really don't have any credibility given the amount of money needed to make them viable. The map that I have given you here is an old map. They constantly change the route on us. A week ago Friday, what would that make it, about 14 days ago, MVP put out a very long document that I haven't had time to read yet in response to FERC's comments. And in it was a revised map with all kinds of proposed, they have this, what you're seeing on the left here is a blue line, is a proposed route. But they also, in this map they submitted the other Friday, offered alternate routes all over the place, going west, going east, going under the ACP, going around the ACP. It was an amazing plethora of alternatives. And what we know is that when they propose this many, that basically what they're doing is proposing enough to confuse us and to get people all excited. But if you can follow my cursor here, if I've got one, yes, down here in this area, right in here in Montgomery County, is an area that we have been arguing that's over here in this map. If you can see it, it's rather small, but it's the best I could do. But in this area in here that I'm circling where the pipeline is supposedly coming through, on the original proposed, well, not the original, but on the filed proposed line.
Anita, sorry to interrupt you, but we can see your presentation mode rather than the full screen mode, so we can't see where your arrow is pointing on the map.
Okay, so what should I do?
I'm going to switch to my screen as the presenter, and so we can see the full screen, okay? But we'll still be able to hear you as the presenter. Okay, hang on. I appreciate everyone's patience. We're just working on this technical glitch. Okay, here we go. Okay, great. If you could just continue where you left off, Anita.
Right here, can you see now?
Well, we can see the map. My arrow is showing, so we won't be able to see where your arrow is pointing, but if you'll begin speaking, I'll do my best to follow what you're saying.
All right, okay. In the map in the right, the lower right, we have a green area. Yeah, you were there, and you have a green area. No, up higher. There. That little green area. And in that area to the left of that is an intensely karsted area of caves and sinkholes due to the stratigraphy and the faulted and metamorphic rock stratigraphy, the geology of this particular area, which MVP and none of its engineers have ever traversed before. So one of the things in this alternative map is that we're trying to get around that karst area because it is so intensely chewed up with sinkholes and with underground caves. And of course, the ecology that goes with that, the brown bats, the Indiana bats, and all of the other kinds of subterranean fauna and some flora that live in that area. And in their latest proposal from a couple of Fridays ago, they indeed suggested that they might be going around that area slightly, but they're going into an unmapped area, which is in a national historic preservation area called the North Fork Valley Rural Historic District, and they're going into it deeper, and so it's going to devastate that particular historic district. So we have to fight that particular point. So the point about all of this with the pipeline is that one of their strategies is to constantly change the routes so that citizen groups are constantly standing on one leg trying to address with landowners and with the professionals that we have hired and any legal people we have, trying to address the changes that they are proposing and do them very quickly. And so it leads to all kinds of legal issues and organizational issues that we really hadn't anticipated. So the environment is, of course, a major issue. If you go on to the next slide, can you do that or can I do that? Okay, in this particular slide, I offered what these pipelines look like when they're being built. I don't know if Lewis mentioned this at first because I came in as things were going on, but basically these 42-inch pipelines are new engineering. They've only done a few miles. They haven't done anything as long as the ACP, the ACP line, and even this Mountain Valley, which is 301, if they keep the proposed route. But up in the upper left corner of this slide is the building of one of these lines, a piece of one, and it is in, I believe this is in Nebraska, and you can see how much land is being disturbed, and that's where you have soil. And much of our area, we don't have soil. We have rock. And so the soil is incredibly thin. They're going to have to blast. And doing so, they're going to mess up the karst. They're going to mess up the underground water supply. And they may even destroy it because most of the people are on wells, not to mention how it flows into streams, creeks, and other bodies that are used by the wildlife. And then you're going to have an intense forest defragmentation because they have to have at least 150-foot wide swath in order to lay these lines. And then after that, you have the issue of maintaining a 50-foot to a 70-foot wide easement. And finally, what I'll show you on my last slide is that the easement agreements that they're circulating request that everybody agree to at least 2 lines to their thing. And I need to go back for a second. I need to go back. And on the right then is the laying, right at the top is the laying of the line in Nebraska. And you can see again where they have soil, the disruption. Now put that on a slope that is at 45 to 65 degree angle, and you can see some of the problems. Lower left is an existing line that was put in about 3 years ago for a Celanese plant in Giles County. The slope on that particular picture and that particular swath, and that was only a 12-inch line. I thought it was an 8-inch, but I learned the other day it was a 12-inch line going into a factory below. And already you can see some sedimentation happening. And in viewing it last Saturday, there's a sinkhole at the bottom that goes into the karst system. So, and a heavy rain with all the sediment that's going to, even though they supposedly have some kind of barriers there to reduce sedimentation runoff, it's going to be an issue. But on the lower right is one of those compressor stations that Lewis was talking about. And in our area, they went up to 100 acres for one of these compressor stations. They say they're not going to put one in Virginia. That's how they filed. We know they're lying because of their communications with the local citizens. And they will try to put one in, and we know where. And it's going to destroy things like condors, hawks, eagles, otter, beaver, deer, bear. It's going to be a mess, and it's constant noise, as Lewis talked about. Montgomery County, it will be in Montgomery County where I'm living and where Virginia Tech is located, and the county is working on a noise ordinance for it. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. All right, this captures some of the the issues here. Up on the upper left is some of the loss of dependent species who need the forest. I mean, because it's so big, and because there's going to be several of them. It's not just Mountain Valley. It's not just ACP. They have at least 2 others planned at this point, if not 4 others planned, are in the works to possibly be built. So we have increased predation. We have loss of dependent species, brood parasitism between the cowbirds and the existing species. Lower left is an Indiana bat. We already have problems with our bats, and they're endangered, and it's going to be worse. They're doing a crappy job of surveying, and we know that. And on the right is a brook trout, and that is our canary in the coal mine, because we know when they start dying, when the acidity changes in the streams from sedimentation and runoff from the compressor stations, which are ridiculously hazardous, they're going to go, and there are already not very many of them. Okay, next slide, please. This is a blow-up of that area where I was telling you to try to reduce the karst if they actually adopt it. The blue line is for the pipeline. And as you can see it going around the edge here, but it's not really. In the right-hand side of this diagram, you can still see yellow and pink. So they're still going through a very heavily karsted area, even if they change their route and decide to try to miss the part on the left that's circled, which is called the Mount Tabor Sinkhole Plain. Okay, so the next slide then would be helpful. One of the issues is the issues of historic resources. We have now identified six historic districts in the area, and along the pipeline. There are 11 counties in West Virginia, 6 counties in Virginia, and with 6 historic districts, not counting individual sites, we are trying to do something rather novel, and I'll let you know more if you contact me next week. I'll let you know more what that is, but something rather novel to get FERC to pay attention to the view sheds and other National Historic Preservation Act Section 106 criteria. I just put in a couple of pictures here from Montgomery County. The one on the left will be within, about 150 yards of the current proposed route. It's the Bennett's Mill. And we're concerned about, with the blasting, we're concerned about the foundation and whether it can withstand, the effects of the blasting. On the right is McDonald's Mill, which is much earlier. It says 1847 here. I think it actually dates back much earlier to the 18th century. Certainly the community down there, the McDonald's Mill area, dates back to the Revolutionary War. And the landowner at the time, it wasn't a community, it was the landowner's property. And in the Revolutionary War, he was quite involved as a Tory to some very interesting local Revolutionary War history that was significant, hardly ever talked about, but it was significant. If they'd lost this area, it would have been a major blow and possibly have cut off the possibility of us having our own country. So this site has quite a bit attached to it. It's kind of outside of, it's about half a mile or 3/4 of a mile from the actual corridor. So it may not suffer very much, this McDonald's Mill, but at the same time, we have this integrity of the entire historic district. It should be treated as one entity and not as a set of buildings. So the historic resources are a major, major issue for us. So if you want to go on to the next slide, please. All right, I hope you can read this. If not, I'll try reading it to you. This is a piece from the agreement form that is circulating. It hit Montgomery County last week. Nobody's signing it. We're working hard to resist all of this with our attorneys. But number 7, I mean, this is so much like the broad form deed, if any of you know that from the old coal mining days. But it says, basically, I agree to give you for a small amount of money, I agree to give you all rights to this property forever and eternity and to put in as many pipelines as you want and do to it whatever you want. Meanwhile, I can't use it for anything except maybe some cattle grazing or some sheep grazing, but I can't put a house on it, I can't cross it with machinery, I can't get here from there, and all kinds of issues that restrict usage. Point number 7 says For the consideration herein recited, grantor does hereby give, grant, and convey unto grantee its successors and assigns a further right at any time or from time to time to lay, maintain, operate, renew, alter, improve, protect, repair, and remove one additional pipeline and all necessary equipment thereto, appurtenances, thereto as it may desire within the right-of-way and easement areas. The additional pipeline to be laid approximately parallel to the first line laid shall be considered a pipeline as the term is used above. So it gives you the right for them to put an equal or larger pipeline right next to it. We know that in Wisconsin, they've been laying 4 of them side by side. So this easement agreement is very far-reaching, and we're going to probably take that to court. So if you do things with it to try to slow them down. So we can have the next slide, please.
And just to let you know, we're going to need to finish up in just a minute or so to let Cathy have time to speak as well.
I understand, and this is my last slide, actually. And like Lewis was saying, you know, for ABRA as a collaborating group, here's what the citizens groups are doing. These are all of the citizens groups I could think of at midnight last night. POWER is our organizing group, and it consists of all of the preserve groups. We have all of these: Monroe, Giles, Craig, Montgomery, Roanoke, Franklin, Floyd, and the Sierra Club is involved, the Blue Ridge Environmental Defense League, the Appalachian Mountain Advocates, the Greenbrier River Watershed Association, multiple local historical societies, Preserve Virginia is also involved, land conservation organizations. And what's amazing to us, folks, is that we are coordinating our efforts. It's troublesome. It has lots of pitfalls in it because of the goals and purposes of the individual groups, but it's very amazing to many of us to see us work together. Lewis mentioned access roads and storage lanes. They're just creaming us with the compressor. The compressor stations are incredibly dangerous. They'll kill you. I had a report from my student this morning. I was looking for the data, but with the carcinogens that come out of their smokestacks and with what they dump in the streams, they're very, very, very bad, and we shouldn't have them. And I quit.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anita. That was a great presentation of information for the Mountain Valley Pipeline. We do have a lot of questions that have come in, but we're also running just a few minutes behind schedule because of the technical difficulties at the beginning. So I'm going to go straight to Cathy now, and then we'll come back after Cathy and Hannah have spoken for questions for anyone who's able to stay. But I'd like to present as much information as possible for those who need to get off right at 3. Cathy Kunkel is an energy analyst for the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis and co-author of a new study on the finances of the proposed pipeline projects, a study co-sponsored by Appalachian Voices. Thank you so much for joining us, Cathy. And what did your new study reveal about the finances of the project?
Yeah, thank you. Can folks see my screen, or do I need to do something to share it here? Okay.
Okay, there should be an invitation for you now to share your screen.
Yeah, I
Wonderful, there you go.
Just did. Okay, so is my screen visible now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, great. So thank you, Lee. I'm going to present on a report that we released last week on the Atlantic Coast and Mountain Valley pipelines. We looked at the risks to ratepayers, investors, and communities of these pipelines, and focusing specifically on economic and financial risks as opposed to environmental risks. So I'm going to start by putting these 2 pipelines in the context of the larger build-out of pipeline capacity that's happening right now in the Mid-Atlantic region, and talk about who bears the risk of building too many pipelines, basically. And then I'll talk about the 2 individual pipelines. So as I think everyone knows, and as Lou referenced at the start of his presentation, these 2 pipelines are coming during a major infrastructure expansion that's driven by the desire to get low-priced natural gas out of the Marcellus and Utica regions and bring that gas to market. And what we've found in a nutshell is that the dynamics of the pipeline business tend towards overbuilding, towards building too much pipeline capacity. And there are a lot of different financial considerations for different entities that are involved in the pipeline business, but they all kind of tend towards overbuilding. So major traditional pipeline companies like Kinder Morgan are all competing with each other now to build out the best and most well-connected pipeline networks out of the Marcellus. We also have utility companies that are getting into the pipeline business now. And with them, a lot of the risk of overbuilding pipelines can be passed on to their captive ratepayers, and they are, just able to earn profits off of the pipelines. Natural gas production companies are also getting into the pipeline business right now because their core business of drilling is not doing very well, and they're looking for ways to boost revenues and investment value. So all of these entities have incentives basically to propose new pipeline projects as quickly as possible, and none of them really have an incentive to seriously consider alternatives to natural gas that are going to become increasingly cost-effective and increasingly widespread over the lifetime of these projects. And unfortunately, the federal regulatory process misses the potential for overbuilding and even encourages overbuilding. So there's no regional planning process for natural gas pipeline infrastructure in the way that there is for other types of infrastructure like electric transmission lines. Instead, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission looks at pipeline projects on a project-by-project basis and determines that a line is necessary if the project developer can show that it has entered into contracts for the majority of the capacity of the project. But what we've found in many cases, including Atlantic Coast and Mountain Valley, is that the developers of the project are entering into contracts with affiliated companies for the capacity of the project. So, the fact that a pipeline developer is signing a contract with an affiliate is evidence that there's a financial advantage to that company from building the project, but not necessarily that there's an independently established need for a pipeline. And in addition to not planning for pipeline development, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is in charge of regulating pipeline rates. And what we've found is that pipelines have traditionally earned very high rates of return, which is driving more capital into the sector than is really needed. And this graph just shows that major pipeline companies in the last 5 years have been very profitable, most of them earning more than a 12% return, which is very high even in the utility business. And the tendency to overbuild pipelines is widely understood in the industry itself. Natural gas industry insiders, as you can see from these quotes, are saying that pipeline capacity out of the Marcellus is likely to be overbuilt. And this graph here, the red part of the graph just shows how much pipeline capacity will come online if the pipelines that are currently under consideration are actually built in the next few years. And then the black line shows the projected production from the Marcellus and Utica. So you can see that really the expected pipeline capacity is really dwarfing the amount of gas available. So overbuilding brings several risks. For ratepayers, excluding natural gas that is exported, the rates that are charged for shipping gas on pipelines are ultimately passed through to the consumers of the gas, who are largely customers of electric and natural gas utilities. So that leaves ratepayers of those utilities at risk for paying for unnecessary new capacity, at least for the next 15 or 20 years of the initial contracts with these pipelines. Overbuilding creates the risk for investors that once the initial contract expires, that the developer is not able to renew a contract. So because if a pipeline proves to be unnecessary, the shippers may not want to renew their contracts. Meanwhile, landowners are facing the risk of having their property seized for a line that ultimately proves to be unnecessary. And landowners and communities are facing risks that the current rush to build all these pipelines is going to lead to cutting corners and safety problems, which is documented in more detail in our report. So let me switch over to the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which is it's a venture between Duke, Dominion, Piedmont Natural Gas, and AGL Resources. Now, those same companies, subsidiaries of those same companies, have also contracted for almost 90% of the capacity of the pipeline for the next 20 years. The cost of building the pipeline, including the profit for those developers, will be passed on to those subsidiaries that are shippers on the pipeline, and ultimately it's the ratepayers of those utilities who will be on the hook for paying for those costs. So this kind of structure imposes risks to the ratepayers of those utilities. For one thing, ratepayers only benefit from the project if the cost of constructing the pipeline is outweighed by the savings of being able to source cheaper gas from the Marcellus via the pipeline. And that's how Dominion and Duke are justifying the project. But we found that Dominion has relied on a very optimistic forecast of fuel price savings to justify the project. And there's also the risk that Dominion and Duke will not need all of the capacity that will be supplied by the Atlantic Coast pipeline. And if that's the case, then ratepayers will still be on the hook to pay for that capacity. Right now, it appears that the need for the Atlantic Coast pipeline has been overstated. For example, in applying to FERC for the pipeline, Atlantic Coast has asserted that one use of the gas from the pipeline will be for Dominion's New Brunswick and Greensville gas plants in Virginia. But in applying to the State Corporation Commission in Virginia to build those power plants, Dominion has asserted that the plants will be fueled from the Transco line. So it appears that two pipelines are being built to supply one power plant. So, and also ratepayers will likely be on the hook and bearing a lot of the risk that the project will be over budget. So in short, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline is a relatively low risk venture for the project developers because most of the risk of the project is borne by those utilities, customers in Virginia and North Carolina. We also looked in our study at the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which has a very different risk profile. Mountain Valley is a supplier-driven pipeline, meaning that, it's a joint venture between EQT, NextEra, and several other companies, and all of the shippers are affiliates of those companies, but the project is really dominated by EQT, which is one of the largest Appalachian shale gas drillers, and it's also the entity that is contracted to ship the largest volume of gas on the pipeline. So we found that the biggest risks from this project stem from the financial weakness of EQT. The whole drilling sector is in turmoil because of sustained low natural gas prices, which are widely expected to remain low at least into 2017. EQT's stock has fallen 26% in the last couple of years. Its credit ratings are one notch above junk status. Bankruptcies are widely expected in the drilling sector in general this year, and banks are expected to cut back on lending. So for EQT, it makes sense to get into the pipeline business because of the traditionally stable and higher profits to be found in that sector. But this also means that communities along the pipeline route bear risks that stem from EQT's financial weakness. EQT's weak financials suggest that it will adopt only a limited commitment to communities, and then it may cut corners on the project, leading to greater concerns about safety. In short, our study has found that natural gas pipeline infrastructure out of the Marcellus and Utica region will become overbuilt within the next several years, and this is an outcome that is recognized by many in the industry itself. Without a coordinated approach to natural gas pipeline planning, as exists for many other types of infrastructure, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission cannot make an honest determination of the need for these pipelines. And we argue that FERC should not rule on these particular projects until they can be considered as part of a regional planning process. We also recommend that FERC should lower the returns, the profits that it allows to pipeline companies to stop encouraging so much capital flowing into this sector. And finally, we recommend that Virginia regulators should be paying more attention to the risk to ratepayers of affiliate contracts that are underlying these pipelines. So thank you all very much. That's my contact information, and the bottom is the link to the page where you can find our study. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cathy, for that wonderful presentation. We have a lot of questions coming in. I do want to get to Hannah for anyone who needs to get off the line. Two quick additions. I'd like to mention from our comments that have come in that Mountain Lake Preservation Alliance, as well as the Friends of Water, can be added to the allied groups for Mountain Valley Pipeline. Well, if you would send in any questions that you have for Cathy, we'll get to them in just a moment. And let me turn now to Hannah, who will present suggestions for how audience members can become more involved if they are interested. Hannah Wiegard is the Virginia campaign coordinator for Appalachian Voices. She will speak briefly about what our organization is doing to support the groups of impacted citizens along the proposed routes that oppose the pipelines. She will also offer suggestions for how to become involved. Thanks, Hannah, for speaking today.
Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Great, thanks, Lee. Yeah, thanks to all of today's speakers that have participated in this webinar. I know everyone's doing hard work to fight these pipelines. So again, I'm Hannah. I'm the Virginia campaign coordinator for Appalachian Voices. Started working on the pipeline issues when we first heard about them back in 2014. Appalachian Voices is committed to fighting new investments in natural gas, including all proposed pipelines, compressors, and we've been active on new gas plants as well that have been proposed in our region. We view these new investments in gas as directly competing with the scale of investment that's needed in clean energy, solar, wind, and energy efficiency. So much like our very long history in fighting coal's impacts in our region, Appalachian Voices is working to directly support local groups of impacted residents and pipeline opponents, as well as mobilizing a broader movement across our region and even nationally to demonstrate wide opposition to these pipeline proposals. So recently, just as of April 25th, we noted that it was reported that Dominion has delayed the start date for Atlantic Coast Pipeline construction up to the summer of 2017. So it was reported that delay was due to, quote, detailed requests from FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, for additional environmental opposition.
Hannah, your phone is breaking up. If you could repeat what you had just said.
Hey, I'm sorry, is that better?
Yes, that is much better. Thank you.
Sorry, everyone, for the technical difficulty. The delay apparently has been, quote, the result of significant opposition from environmental and community groups, particularly in the mountains of Western Virginia. It was reported in the Charlotte Business Journal. So there are delays there. Meanwhile, on the Mountain Valley Pipeline, there have been some road bumps. The Forest Service recently filed 30 pages of comments, citing numerous deficiencies and areas of concern for the company to be addressing before the filed application would be considered complete. So to me, this is a true testament to the group's hard work and the efforts to make sure there's public input in the consideration of these pipeline projects. It does show that we can be heard if we're working together, and that as we're moving forward, we're building the organization that's needed to defeat these projects. One point I did want to make is that elected leaders can be great allies for us to amplify and elevate citizens' concerns. It's going to be making our movement much more powerful, but of course that only happens when leaders understand the adverse consequences of these projects, right? So including the fact that approval of any of the proposed pipelines would accelerate fracking, would destroy vital forests and wetlands, as Anita was talking about, and would lock our region into deeper reliance on fossil fuels rather than clean energy sources like wind and solar. So some elected officials are with us and have been calling for the pipelines to be evaluated comprehensively rather than project by project. Of course, to avoid the appearance of political activity on this call, I won't name them by name, but it's members of our congressional delegation and members of the Virginia General Assembly and state legislatures. They have written and sent letters to FERC to that regard, but many still have not. So one thing folks can do is ask your representative to write to FERC. And it is really important that you do get involved. Let me say that, especially if you haven't already. There is a tremendous gap in our legislators' familiarity with concerns about the pipelines. The governor of Virginia, Governor McAuliffe, continues to proactively support the pipelines. These electeds have been ignoring the risks to ratepayers that Cathy outlined. They've chosen Dominion's interests over those of thousands of community members, plain and simple. I did want to make one last point, which is that recently the resistance to these projects is getting traction in the public. One goal for us is to expand that movement. At the same time, there's been growing controversy over issues like coal ash pond closing, state clean power plan implementation, offshore drilling. Folks may have heard in the news late last week the Spectre pipeline explosion on Friday that damaged or destroyed several homes. It's a prime example of the dangers that we face, right? It could happen here, and we just need to be asking, where does it stop? So I'll leave everyone with this, which is to get involved. And all the organizations that you heard from today, we'll keep in touch with you, keep you apprised, and remember to reach out to your elected officials on these issues. And lastly, spread the word. Talk to your friends and others in your community about what you learned today to help us grow the movement and defeat these projects. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Hannah. That was a great presentation. For any of you who do need to get off of the line now, thank you so much for joining the webinar. And here's a couple of web links for additional information about the work that we're doing here at Appalachian Voices and future projects that we'll have in the webinar series. For any of you who can stay on the line, we do have quite a lot of questions coming in. So I'll get through as many as we can. And again, I apologize for the technical difficulties that have put us a couple minutes behind schedule. So there have been several questions about the health impacts, especially surrounding the compressor stations. So I wonder if one of you could speak to whether there is any effort to include a comprehensive health impact study together with the environmental impact study, so that these issues can also be considered when the proposals are being evaluated by FERC.
This is Lou. I can at least partially respond to that. I'm pretty sure that in their numerous filings, as well as testimony before the scoping meetings that took place early last year, that the representatives of Yokeville and Friends of Buckingham made quite clear to FERC that there are health concerns and that those should be considered as part of the environmental impact assessment. Whether or not the agency does that, I don't know. The conducting of the EIS is a little bit of a black box, I think. But I am aware that point has been made to FERC, but it doesn't hurt for it to be made again and again.
Great, thanks. Liz, this question I think is also for you. Are there any actions that can be taken to extend the scoping period past the June 2nd deadline? One of our audience members is concerned that some of the locations and access roads won't be known in time to meet that deadline.
Yes, since we just got this today, we haven't reacted yet, but I intend on behalf of ABRA to communicate to FERC and ask that there be an extension, but the more people that have that concern could communicate to the Secretary of FERC, and we'll put for those of you who get our update, we'll have that information in our Thursday edition. But yes, it is possible. Those types of considerations have been done before. There have been extensions, but not in every case. So we frankly have had more receptivity when we've made comments, asked for extensions to the Forest Service than we've had with FERC. But in the case of the scoping, we weren't even absolutely sure they're going to have scoping hearings. We knew there would be scoping. So I would urge people that have that concern to write to FERC and ask for an extension beyond the June 2nd deadline, and we as the ABRA Coalition certainly intend to.
And Lewis, if I may step in, don't just write to FERC, but also get representatives and your congresspeople to make the same request. That carries a little bit more, you know.
Good point.
Great, thanks. There's also several folks in the audience that are coming in from New England and especially in New Hampshire. And so there's questions about ways to nationalize the discussion. Several of the comments have indicated that similar issues are being faced in New England. And there's a question about whether the discussion could be made more broad.
Well, I can respond a little bit. I can't share the specifics because I don't know them, but I am aware that there have already been some conference call dialogues in the last year or more involving several regions of the country. I've been involved in one or two of them. And then a week ago Saturday, when we had our pipeline summit, co-sponsored by ABRA and Power, we had Jane Kleeb, K-L-E-E-B, who some of you know, led the fight against the Keystone XL pipeline, the successful fight, I might add. And in her remarks to our pipeline summit, she made a similar plea that there be more of a national dialogue on some of these issues. And indeed, I know of steps that are being taken to move in that direction. So I think it's beginning to happen, and there's a greater drumbeat for that to happen.
Yeah, and this is Anita, and to let me add in that, Lewis, is that if people contacted me, we have in Montgomery County or in the Mountain Valley and Power Coalition, we have a person who's really trying to do that. One of the concerns are ways of doing it, and Jane was a big help with this. And I'm sorry, Lewis, I had to miss that meeting that day. I really wanted to go, but I had another, professional commitment. But one of the things, if they contact me, I'll put them in touch with our person who is working on this. And one of the ways is how to do it, how to best do this. Has been, I think Jane said this, that very commonly the national organizations who are the ones that people usually give to and have national currency can be the least, because they're already so organized, they're already so structured. They can be of less help to us as we try to do this. So I think we need a grassroots kind of involvement on this, and we do have people working on it on our end, and I'll be happy to turn you on to them if they contact me.
Great. Thanks, y'all. There's also a question elsewhere along the full natural gas infrastructure line asking about proposed bans on injection sites. There's concerns raised that EQT, one of the main participants in the Mountain Valley Pipeline, is blocking efforts in citizens groups to prevent injection wells of waste disposal water in their areas. Is anyone familiar with efforts to try to enforce these bans?
I'm trying to remember the county that banned it. I think it was...
Yeah, it's Fayette County?
Yes, thank you. Fayette County, West Virginia, that is, as a county ordinance has banned it, and FERC is taking that forward legally to see if they can stop it. Other counties banning it, the injection wells, that's for fracking, and you have to have fracking for that. Many of us are not there yet. I mean, they're talking about eligibility of fracking for Montgomery and Giles counties. I think we are very low risk for it. Fayette County is being fracked. So it's an issue for those kinds of counties at the moment. And getting our local government here in Montgomery, and I suspect in Giles, Franklin, Craig, Floyd, to do that on Roanoke, it's down the pike. We're still fighting compressor stations, noise regulations, sedimentation, Virginia environmental, DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, all kinds of immediate issues. And fracking's not on our radar right this minute.
Okay, great, thanks. Cathy, this may go slightly outside of the scope of your study, but perhaps either you or one of the other participants can address this. The question is, can existing energy sources without Marcellus Shale make up for energy lost from coal-fired power plant closings?
I mean, that is outside the scope of what we talked about in our study. I mean, what's going on now is that both renewables and natural gas are substituting for the loss of coal-fired generation. I mean, I would imagine that in theory, if we were being more aggressive with renewables and energy efficiency, it would be possible to make that transition certainly with less natural gas. But I don't know. I haven't really run the numbers on that.
Great. Thanks. We do have several more questions, and I'm sorry that we can't get to all of them today, but we should go ahead and wrap things up out of respect for everyone's time. So I will try to respond to the questions that have come in offline to the extent possible. So thank you so much. And thank you, Louis, Anita, Cathy, and Hannah for participating, and thank you all for attending this webinar. This webinar is based...
Thank you.
Thank you. Is based on an article written in the April-May issue of our bi-monthly newspaper, the Appalachian Voice. You can read this article or subscribe to the newspaper online. In just a moment, you'll be receiving a survey about the webinar. The survey is a requirement of my AmeriCorps position, and I'd really appreciate any feedback that you offer. There are 4 short questions as well as space for you to add additional information or comments. These questions will appear as soon as the webinar ends. I want to thank everyone again for coming, and take care.